Hello, everyone. Hello, and welcome to our Certification Success Stories webinar. I'm so happy that you are able to join us. And for those of you who are watching this as a recording, we appreciate that as well. I am Viviane Vicente. I'm the Vice President of Client Experience at the Cultural Intelligence Center, and it is a pleasure to be here with you all. Today, as we talk about the power of cultural intelligence and share success stories that started with CQ certification, I am joined by three stellar professionals. My mentor and friend, Dr. David Livermore, who probably doesn't need introductions, but I want to say that he is one of the founders of the CQ Center and a leading authority in cultural intelligence. Dr. Livermore has written many books on cultural intelligence and other leadership topics, and he is a sought-after speaker and highly respected professor. He has delivered dozens of certification programs, and I'm going to ask him about that. Thank you for being here, Dave. I'm also joined by Des Ong, the director of the Future Leader Group, based in Sydney, Australia, and focusing on leadership, team, and board development, governance, organizational change, executive coaching, and shaping future-ready leaders. Des has spent 25 years working with organizations locally and internationally across a range of sectors, including media, entertainment, hospitality, healthcare, retail, education, finance, nonprofit, government, international aid. He has been a keynote speaker across continents, and in addition to his role as the Future Leader Group, he serves on a number of governance boards. Des has written his research thesis on the role of emotional and cultural intelligence in developing effective leaders. And he is also an associate facilitator with the CQ Center. And we have Dr. Carrie LeFerle, a professor of ethics and culture in the Timberland Advertising Institute at SMU in Dallas, Texas. Carrie is a longtime CQ certified facilitator who I had the pleasure of meeting not too long ago. So I am thrilled that she accepted our invitation to join this panel. Beyond teaching and researching about cultural intelligence, Carrie thrives on developing CQ within the education sector, religious organizations, and businesses looking to understand how cultural intelligence can positively impact effective communication. With over 60 publications examining the impact of social, ethical, and cultural influences on the practice of advertising, Carrie is an expert on cultural phenomena who has traveled the world and lived in several countries. She is certified in cultural intelligence and unconscious bias as a trainer by the Cultural Intelligence Center and is currently exploring CQ in advertising applications as a 2024 CQ Fellow under Dave's leadership. We have my colleague Prudence Angoulême supporting us today as our session administrator. So I want to thank Prudence for being here today, as well as our team for all the work that they've done behind the scenes to make this webinar happen. Before I kick off this discussion with our panelists and ask them questions about their history and stories with CQ certification, I'd like to briefly share my own story. I decided to get certified in CQ while I was running my consultancy because I wanted to help my clients, the individuals and organizations that I advised and supported, in navigating the multicultural world that we all live and most of us work in. I must share with you that when I discovered cultural intelligence, when I discovered the CQ framework, I found a language that I didn't know existed, but knew I needed. And it was a great joy and privilege to get certified by Dr. Livermore. And it is an honor for me to be here today, talking to the three of you and bringing this conversation to all of you who have joined us. So let's kick it off. I'd like to start with Dave. And again, I know you've facilitated so many of these certification programs, but could you talk to us about how the CQ certification programs were created? What was the idea, the why behind it?
Yeah, thanks, Viviane. Thank you to all of our guests joining us. It's fun to see the chat and some familiar faces from around the world, as well as many others that I'm not as familiar with. Yeah, how we got started doing them. So there's a reactive answer and there's a proactive answer. Let me sort of share both. The reactive response is. Our first certification program happened before anyone was on staff at the Cultural Intelligence Center full time. So I was still working full time at university, as was Lynn Van Dyne. And in about 2008, 2009, the CQ assessment had started to move out of the academic journal articles into being available, particularly to faculty to use in their classroom. 2009, I wrote the first edition to Leading with Cultural Intelligence. And so when I say reactive, we started to get contacted by people of saying like, hey, like the assessment, but I feel like I need some help on knowing how to actually use it. And so it was sort of like building the plane as we were flying it. We're like, okay, yeah, we should offer a certification in this. And to be quite honest, we announced it without having fully designed what it was going to look like. And there was enough demand for it that within about 2 weeks, the program was full and we had to schedule another one that was going to happen a little while later. So that's more the reactive. There was demand for, we're interested in this cultural intelligence thing. We need to understand more about it. The more strategic side of it was, though, I would say from the very beginning, we knew, and I would still hold to this today, that the assessment by itself isn't overly meaningful. Like I believe in its value and its importance, but if you just hand someone the assessment and they take it and they look at the results, it's like, okay, so now I've got my scores. What do I do with this? And so the more strategic, proactive thing was to say, we want to give skills to independent consultants, faculty, HR directors, people in a variety of different places so that they internally can bring CQ to life in ways far better than we can from the outside. And really that began the journey toward this wonderful community now of over 3,000 CQ certified facilitators, and many of you being part of that, of saying you're the real experts to know how to bring CQ to life. And that was always sort of the heart of it. Like we know CQ really well, but you know how to actually apply it. If I can just say one more thing, you made the mistake, Viviane, of telling me, oh, we've got enough time. You can tell stories and that. But one
Please
other thing
do.
I'd say that in terms of super pragmatics of like, what does it actually look like to use the assessment practically? Like it's one thing to have it. And by the way, in saying that, I think one of the things that's different about CQ, and maybe we'll get into this in conversation, is if you take the strength finders, for those of you who know that, you take it, you can read the book, you're pretty much good to go, right? Like I'm not saying there isn't value in going through a training or being certified, but it's very intuitive to go, okay, if you have the woo or you have the strategic or futurist strength, you know what to do with it. When CQ, you look at, okay, so I'm moderate in drive, I'm low in knowledge, I'm high in strat, like, so what? What does this actually mean for me? So the certification was, will help tell you what it means for you based upon you sharing with us what your priorities are. And so that meant for places like Harvard Business School saying they wanted to assess the CQ of their incoming MBAs when they started, 1 year in, and again when they graduated, to sort of track both institutionally and at the individual level how they were growing. Now today there are many companies all over the world that use CQ to measure progress in DEI or EDI initiatives. So we know that not all DEI work necessarily brings about behavior change. So how do we find out whether or not the initiative we're doing is actually improving CQ? So that's a way that certification started to help practically. And then the last example, one of the biggest and most fascinating projects that we were a part of for a number of years at the Cultural Intelligence Center is working with the U.S. Department of Defense, where thousands of assessments were used a year to actually vet some of their third-party cultural training providers to find out who's actually equipping our troops or our special operations forces with an insight into their cultural intelligence or not. So anyway, clearly I could go on and on about it, but I would say that's both the, like, part of it was just the nice problem to have of people were actually asking for it. But more strategically, the reason that we've continued to do it is really this strong belief in that individuals like the ones that I get to be a guest with here today are the people who really know deeply how you put it into their respective places.
Wow. Thank you, Dave. And yes, it's interesting the reactive, but also the huge responsibility that it is to deepen people's understanding of the CQ framework, but empowering them to use the assessments, as you said, in the applications that are most relevant to them and taking this work forward beyond what maybe was originally intended. Thank you. Carrie, I know you've been certified in CQ for many years, but I'd like to ask you, what was your main motivation to become CQ certified and what you were doing at the time? What was your professional activity at the time when you decided to get certified?
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I've got to say I'm blown away by looking at the chat and see people from everywhere. We've got it's so wonderful. So thank you for joining us. So yeah, I almost think I fell on it, just, lucky chance a little bit. I was a professor teaching culture, international advertising, cross-cultural communication. My research is, as you had said in the introduction, focused on how do we use culture for effective communication. And so in the advertising space, I had been using tons of scales. Some are the ones that are also used within the cultural values within the cultural intelligence certification. But I hadn't found anything that put everything in a nice framework, I guess, that was so concise and so logical and easy to use at the same time. And that's not to say it's not based on lots of research and insight and depth, but just easy to convey. And so I saw a certification come up. I was teaching and I had the semester off for research. And I thought, well, this seems like a good thing. I'm going to go look at it some more. And I had followed a little bit about David Livermore, and I thought, wow, he knows his stuff. And so I went to the training and it changed my world. I walked away from there. Just I can carry a sign and say CQ. I know a lot about culture and different scales for those that are in the research or education domain out there, from Schwartz to everything. And it's not, I was on the other side of it, and now I know how to package it better to be able to convey it to students or to business professionals or administrators. Let's look at what is somebody's motivation to engage in culture and understand your students or understand the new generation of people coming, and so it was just lovely. I was delighted, and I still am, and I'm exploring it even more. Every day is something new.
Thank you. And we can see your passion. It shows, and that's true for so many of our certified facilitators. I hope you can notice it in my voice, also in my expressiveness. But yes, it's true for many, many of us. Thank you. Des, Like Carrie, you have been CQ certified for many years, and you are also an associate facilitator with the CQ Center. Can you tell us how your CQ journey started? How did you decide to attend a certification program?
Yeah, thanks, Viviane. And hello, everyone out there. It's really great to be a part of this kind of panel with all of you. My CQ journey probably started a really, really long time ago because growing up in Australia and also being Southeast Asian in my approach, I've kind of navigated both the Eastern and the Western world for all my life. And it's been really a curious journey on my own self-reflection. And that really led me into thinking about some areas that I'm passionate about, which was about growing people and how do people develop and how do people actually develop in particular around leadership. And I then ended up exploring a research thesis on the role of emotional intelligence and cultural intelligence in developing effective leaders. And in my study, in my research and looking at, obviously some big names came out like Lynn and Sunang and David Livermore as well. And with that, that made me lead into seeing what kind of certification programs were around. Was there an assessment that actually looked at cultural intelligence? And looking at that assessment, I wanted to go and get certified. And so I spent many years actually with David on multiple certifications and in that process of learning and growing in that space. And so part of that is obviously my own journey about growing up in a Western world, educated in the East, educated in the West, growing up in Eastern, and then moving into that research thesis to be able to then help develop other people. So real passion for helping leaders become more effective, both in the emotional intelligence and cultural intelligence space. So that was my journey into CQ.
Thank you for sharing that. And this is always so interesting to me to see that people come with different motivations, but these two common themes are recurring. So some are interested in the research basis of CQ and the CQ framework. Some come to it from reading, from researching, from the academic world, or even the academic application in business or whatever they're involved in. And some come purely from a practical application, and their main goal is to see what can I use to help my people. Like Des said, to develop people, to help people work better together, have better relationships, be more productive, organizations be more inclusive. And I love this because these programs, they do combine these two things, and they can help a multitude of people and organizations. Every cohort that I've welcomed as a facilitator of certification programs has this diverse audience in terms of their different goals for being there. And they all come out with something so rich, even if it is very different across the group, if we ask them. And I love that. So my next question is sort of related to that, and it is for Dave. Dave, having facilitated so many certification programs, could you share a few examples of how you saw people coming in, how you saw participants come in with their individual goals and purposes for attending that program, and how they came out after having completed the program?
Yeah, Viviane, I was thinking as you just commented on your own experience as our lead individual now who runs all the certification programs. I mean, part of what I love, and I know you do as well, is the diverse backgrounds, diverse industries, goals, etc. And yet, as the ones leading it, right, sometimes it's a little bit challenging. Like, how am I going to help the researcher and the consultant both feel like they walk away with something? I was actually just reflecting on this question because I was with one of our certified facilitators last week, Tara Hastings, who is currently leading diversity efforts at Rover, a company that does an app for dog walking. But when Tara first came through certification, she was with Starbucks. And I see Karima from University of Victoria is joined on today's. I saw your name pop up. And Tara first came to a certification that we did together with the University of Victoria in this beautiful but remote venue on the island of Victoria in British Columbia. And it was pouring rain and it was rather rustic. And I knew that Starbucks was sending Tara because they were really interested in how do we take a more global approach to our DEI strategy that's not just so US centric. And so I felt a little bit of like anxiety about the venue where we were doing. While it was gorgeous, it's not exactly where corporate types would typically tend to expect to go. And then further, just as I started to interact with individuals in the room, I'm like, okay, we have quite a few people from nonprofits. We have quite a few academic. We have independent consultants. But for whatever reason, maybe it was the location, this one, I think she and one other person were the only people from a corporate background. And so I'm going somewhere with this whole story. But when Tara walked in, I introduced myself and then I said, hey, you know, I hope you're going to be good with this because there's actually not many people here today from corporate, but companies are using this all over and we can connect offline if you don't get what you need. And she was very gracious and said, oh, I'm actually looking forward to it. Like it gets old sometimes just being with everybody else is in the same space as me. And I share all that because last week, unprompted, not talking about that we were going to have this conversation today, she was reflecting back on the first time when she went through certification. She said, you know, one of the things I loved about it was that people were from so many different backgrounds and it was so refreshing to hear people even using language that I would never use in the corporate space, but vice versa, feeling like I was able to offer them some input on, but you do have to think about strategically a way to make a business case for cultural intelligence. So that's one piece I would say. I think people are often coming in maybe with a very clear goal, like we heard from you, Des and Carrie, and then surprised that there are many disparate goals all toward the same ultimate end, but you know, more specifically. The other thing I would say though, in terms of your question of what people come in with as compared to what they walk out with, and I think the two are related because of the diverse makeup of individuals who come through certification. I've often talked to individuals, and Carrie, I think you were one of these, who's like, I came in thinking I wanted it for X, and now I'm like, and there's A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Like the longer I heard, there's all these others. And if anything, I was the guy who was like, oh, not to Carrie, but was sometimes saying to people, okay, yes, but focus on at least a couple of those niches because you're not going to be able to apply it to all these areas. So I think, you know, hopefully for the most part, I think people have felt like, yes, they got the objective they came in for to understand more about the assessment and be able to debrief it. But the beauty of it, it's no credit to us at the Cultural Intelligence Center. It's to the credit of the people who show up for it. They suddenly interact with people like the three of you are like, oh my gosh, there's so much I can learn from the leadership development work that Des does in coaching as compared to the advertising expertise that Carrie has. And oh, Viviane, you've taught etiquette, but you've also been, you know, somebody who's a lawyer and you've also done law enforcement. Now I'm going to tell all your stuff, Viviane. She has a very diverse background to her own experience. So yeah, I think that in addition to people having their goals met, they're often augmented as much because of the people that they meet in the room as it is the actual curriculum and content we go through.
And that was my story when I got certified. I was probably in the minority that I was an independent consultant in my cohort, and I truly learned so much because people had a different activity, a different purpose for being there. And it opened my eyes to so many things. So I'm sure that's true for many of us who go through this program. Carrie and Des, if you recall that experience of how you came into the program and how you walked out, please do share.
Oh, Des? Or
Go ahead, Carrie.
oh, okay. Well, yeah, I came in. I remember actually there was probably I don't want to. I was curious, but I wasn't quite sure what I was going to get from it because I thought, well, I know a lot of culture scales, and I know, and like I said, I was doing research across nation to nation, and I was doing it within the U.S., different ethnicities and race. Um, and then just learning uh, the four capabilities and being able to measure them and then develop them was something so tangible and I felt so applicable to so many different areas and I like to go, oh, here but I think that was what I wasn't quite sure what I was going to get. But that was definitely the first one, just the tangible, the ability to measure it and then develop it really was attractive to me. And then I'd say the second thing was the people. There's never a doubt in my mind at a cultural intelligence group or when it's a session going on, the people are so passionate and they have so many different experiences and they apply it in so many different places, as you've been saying, that it's just it's infectious. It's just so lovely. And when you look at the newspapers today in the world and you hear these things, and then you have a group like this and all the people that are online right now. I mean, there's a momentum here. There is a real, I think, spark for change. And I think that cultural intelligence can create peace and change the world. I'm a believer.
That's what we want. We want to change the world. Des?
Yeah, and for me, I came in at obviously coming out of my thesis and then really wanting a constructive tool that would help other people, obviously enable other people to be able to engage in this topic. So that was the predominant thing I came in. But what I did find really fascinating in my first workshop was I realized that because I'd been spending so much time in my own mind, in reading and research, that I realized how little people actually converse about that in my day-to-day. So you don't actually talk about this particular topic, even though in my mind I'd had it so full of about it. And then when I sat in the room and in the certification, I was engaging with all these other practitioners who were curious or at least interested in this area. I found all of a sudden, wow, this is actually really sparking some stimulus and the like. And I think what I really got out of it was a number of good friends that I still catch up with from in the certification. And we also have conversations now a lot around the CQ space. So I find that really refreshing to be able to know that other people are actually talking about this particular topic. So yeah, that was kind of my first experience.
The community, building a sense of community. That's beautiful. Thank you. Carrie, in your introduction, we heard that you wear many hats in your career. So could you talk to us about how you have been using CQ in the various activities that you engage in, the various sectors that you operate in, and what has been most successful for you and your constituents?
Oh, that's a great question. I think so. I teach a course. For 20 years I've taught international advertising, cross-cultural communication. But I actually created a CQ and advertising course several years ago, and it's definitely a class that students love. We go through, they take the assessment, and then we go through and we learn kind of diving deep into each area a little bit. It depends if it's undergraduate or graduate, but then applying it to advertising and how it can be used. So that's been the first area. Then I noticed study abroad students, and they're going to Japan. And so I lived in Japan for 4 years. So I thought, oh, well, let's use some CQ and get students learning before they go, kind of what to expect so that they can get more out of their visit. And that went well. And then I was at church and I noticed that they were talking about how much the culture around the church has changed, and like the climate of the United States, the demographics are shifting. And how do we attract and communicate well with people that, you know, all don't look the same and come from different backgrounds, and even some families that might have, you know, follow are Muslim or follow Hindu, but then this group in the family has gone Christian, or however it may work, or blended families. So then I got into the church and went into church leadership and said, hey, and they took me away on a retreat to do CQ. And that was just fabulous. So I think, like earlier, what was mentioned, just there's so many applications, and we're only limited by the domains that we're maybe in, and we can always keep our eyes open. I've had somebody contact me from the UK, actually, who's doing research on coaching sports and how could CQ be applied to that. And I thought, well, that's fabulous. You know, that's a great area. So I just think, I think that it can be applied to everything. And so for me specifically, it's been academia and then ad agencies. They want to create advertising that resonates with their target audience. Well, you can't resonate if you don't know the culture very well. And not that CQ will give you every answer, but at least it gives us those sophisticated stereotypes to first start, and then even ways to research to then provide an effective communication and advertising campaign.
I'm personally fascinated by that. And I think we all know a few marketing blunders that we've seen due to the lack of CQ knowledge and the impact that causes when it happens. And the impact can be not just on the bottom line of the brand that is advertising, but the social impact of communities when there is not enough of a concern about cultural implications for advertising. So I'm glad you're on our side.
Thank you.
Des, like many of our certified facilitators, or CFs, as we're affectionately called, you work primarily as an independent consultant. Could you talk to us about some of the challenges you faced in presenting CQ to clients and the successes that you found along the way?
Yeah, great question. Perhaps I can share this in light of a story which I experienced at an airport. I was checking in my bags and taking the bags up to the counter. And in my normal kind of gregarious way, I talked to the person at the front there. I said, "G'day, how you going? How's your day been?" And they were just silent. And for the next 20 seconds, it was like the most awkward silence. And I sort of then rehashed. I said, "Oh, hi, how you going?" And then they turned to me and they said, "Why do you speak such good English?" And I was like, wow, like I couldn't believe it almost. Of all places, an international airport, and they kind of put that forward. And so I kind of responded in my usual way, in joking way, and I went, "Oh, ni hao ma, wo hen hao, wo bu shuo zhongwen." And so the rest of the time I spoke to them in a different language for a little bit. They had a bit of a chuckle, I had a bit of a chuckle, and it was kind of really interesting because I think one of the challenges we face is assumption, and the assumption that, you know, judging a book by its cover. And that's definitely my experience as we think about as a person who goes into different environments to assist teams and leaders and executives in their various roles. Getting past that assumption about what is cultural intelligence, or what is this notion about how do we move through diversity and inclusion and equality, and how do we actually speak about when people think very different to us, let alone look different or come from different cultural backgrounds or cultures of origin. So that is by far one of the biggest challenges when you're trying to make, I guess, a sale into an organization, or to be able to get CQ through that front door. So I found that one of the biggest challenges. The other challenge that I've found is that if you do get through that front door initially, that one-off event, so you often get like 3 hours where they want kind of almost like the world in that 3 hours, and you need to change everything about their organization around this diversity, or trying to get the team to work better from a different cultural perspective. And so I think the length of engagement is a tricky one to navigate and to get that sustainable, because one of the big things for me is that I want to see the human transformation part. I want to see the cultural change across teams and organizations and leadership. And that requires time, not just a one-off event. And I think that's I think people think they can microwave oven it sometimes. And so that's a big challenge. But a couple of things that have been really successful of late is when I've really kind of bolted on CQ with some other kind of areas, whether that be preference indicators, or whether it's emotional intelligence, or whether it's through a organizational strategy, and to bring in CQ, that has been a really effective way of being able to get them to pique some interest in that area. I've found that one particular client recently, where we've been talking about a longer engagement, and I think around the cultural values piece has been really important and helpful in navigating both the CQ dynamics, but also talking in that from a team dynamics perspective as well. And so I really found them very practical and very easy to show the highlighted tensions between the two dynamics. And that allows a lot of conversation, but also a lot of personal insight, self-awareness, and probably more powerful, other person awareness within the teams. So yeah, they're probably a couple of some challenges and some success stories as well.
Thank you. Do you find that a challenge is people's perception of cultural intelligence as just that piece of cultural awareness or cultural sensitivity?
I think that is partly the challenge, but I think it's just not even knowing what it is. And I think it's almost like you've got to pretend that they're like a child in terms of the CQ area, and you have to start from the very beginning to unpack, what do we really mean by CQ? What do we mean by even by culture? Because there's the cultural intelligence side, but there's also various other ways of defining culture. And so that's a big piece to get them to differentiate between the two, and then be able to present what is the unique value that the capability of cultural intelligence actually brings to an organization, or to an individual who's in leadership.
Yes, absolutely. And what you said about getting the world in 3 hours in a session, especially if a client wants a one-off, that's never what we want, because we know CQ is a journey. Developing your cultural intelligence is a journey. And if people come to this seeking only to understand cultural differences, they might learn something, but it's not something that will guide them through life and relationships and works, because there will always be a new difference, a new different. So with the capabilities that compose the CQ framework, we want to give people actual tools to navigate any sort of culturally diverse context, culturally diverse situation. So thank you very much for sharing that. I see that we have, yes, Carrie, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to jump on and say that something I think that might be helpful, and that you reminded me of, Des, is what I have found too is to get people to see sort of culture in a bigger sense, because sometimes I do think that they go, oh, here we go, it's another diversity. What do you mean culture? I've said, well, how about even in management, or whether it be a government organization or school administration or a company, but I said, we don't even think about the way that we're naturally inclined to lead, and so I find that one element of leadership is very intriguing to people, to get them to shift not just race, ethnicity, culture, nation to nation, but to say something as simple as, you know, are you when you lead your group of people, are all the people that you're with, especially given the diversity of ages now that are working together in a company, you know, are they all liking, you know, somebody who is direct, or are they more participatory, you know, or are they more supportive or more achievement oriented? And how might that influence, you know, the people you're working with and, you know, the effectiveness of the job that you're all going to do as a team? And right away, it shifts there. You can see it's, oh, that's included in this idea of cultural intelligence. And yes. So, and, you know, just something as simple as that to give examples of shifting, you know, direct, indirect communicators even would be a good, to let people see the breadth, I think, of cultural intelligence.
And get out of that mindset that this is only about different nationalities or different races. Yes,
Yeah.
I completely agree. And one other thing that I think is a challenge for some of us is some organizations, because they are having challenges, legal issues, come to this as check the box, which is also not effective. And you can demonstrate to maybe your shareholders or the public that you are doing something, but are you truly developing and equipping people to be more effective together, to be inclusive, to be respectful? So that's why we want to insist in this journey and not just this one-off training. I see we have a lot of questions here, and I'd like to direct one specific question, or maybe two, to Dave. So we have one here. I'm curious to know how to include Indigenous values into the 10 cultural clusters. Is there a reason Indigenous First Nations values are not separately highlighted?
Great question. There is a reason. And, you know, first and foremost at the cultural intelligence, we're all about research. And so this isn't going to be a very satisfying answer, probably, but the primary reason that we don't report on cultural values or cultural cluster related to Indigenous populations around the world is there's not yet adequate research to report on it. So I acknowledge that is a barrier for people working in places like where Des is, even the US, Canada, et cetera, and really all across the Americas as well. But really, that's the bottom line piece. We don't have it yet. I know there are some interesting studies going on to look at that in different areas. One thing that is sometimes misunderstood in terms of looking at the 10 cultural clusters is a thought that we may be in part saying, and this encapsulates the world. And all we are saying is these are the 10 largest cultural groupings in the world, acknowledging, as Des has already noted from his own story, that Confucian Asia is still a massive cluster with lots of diversity within it. And also, you know, those of you who use the tools know that by the clusters, we sometimes reference nations, but it shouldn't ever be viewed as the clusters and the nations are synonymous, but rather those are nations where you will find a high intensity of that cluster present in it. So again, not necessarily a real useful question because it doesn't help us, I realize, with the practical need for where do people from Indigenous cultures fall, but it's mostly because we don't want to start spouting something off that's not rooted in data.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Serafina, for the questions. And to all of you, we want to hear about new research. If you know about it, if you know researchers who are engaged in this work, we also want to hear about it because, yes, there's a need for more data. The second question to Dave. How does CQ relate compared to IDI, Intercultural Development Inventory, and other cultural assessment tools? I realize we wouldn't have time to address all the assessment tools, but maybe we can start talking a little bit about this. And this is from David Robertson. And David asks, I direct a US-based executive graduate program focused on leadership for sustainability, and we currently use IDI. Should we switch to CQ?
Yes. Next question. Great question, David. So to the broader question, and you acknowledge this, Viviane, which we won't have time to really wade into. I think the really key question to always ask when looking at using an assessment is, what is it that we want to measure? And so answering that question will help inform which tool is the right one to measure it. I realize it's not useful to just talk about it generically, so I'm happy to say it specifically to IDI, and I'm on the faculty at Boston University, and many of my colleagues use the IDI there as well. I would say, in part with your executive program, if you're wanting to measure to what degree are they even open and ready to have a conversation about their potential ethnocentrism, the degree to which they might minimize cultural difference, that's what the IDI was created to measure. Are you operating more from an ethnocentric perspective? I saw there was another comment in the chat about to what degree do we need to start with our own self-awareness and understanding. IDI does a great job of that, very internal focused in terms of what's there. If the primary thing you want to measure an executive program is, and to what degree have these individuals developed the skills to work effectively in and out of a lot of different cultures, that's what CQ was designed to measure. So it really comes back to what you want to look at. We've partnered with Ross School of Business at University of Michigan for a number of years, and they use both to measure different things. The IDI to ask to what degree are our students even starting this identity understanding of themselves to begin the journey, and then they use CQ at multiple times in their experience to say, let's do a starting point in terms of where they are in their skills for global business or working with people with diverse backgrounds here. And then again, when they get closer to graduating.
Thank you. This is great. I see here we have many more questions. We will try to get to most, if not all, but I want to acknowledge a comment by Karima that at UVic, they are looking at CQ and accessibility, CQ and Gen Z, etc. And you may have heard that we are holding a very special certification event later in April in Chicago. And Dave is going to facilitate that along with Dr. Lynn Van Dyne. But following this certification event, we will have a global summit for certified facilitators, and Karima will be one of our panelists. We're super happy about that. Can you speak to cultural and personal DNA at an organizational level, and how are mid-sized international organizations doing? Wow, that's a big question. Who wants to tackle that one?
That's a good Des question.
Yeah, it's a good question. How are mid-sized organizations going? I can't speak for them all around that space, but I think it is a constant tension. I know recently I've been working with a mid-sized organization in the CQ space who have managers across Asia, Africa, and Europe in their approach. And the way that they're experiencing the difficulties in some of the communicational pathways has been quite real for them. And so they've used, we've been working with them, we're using the CQ values as a key component again in navigating some of those tensions. What was the other part of the question, Viviane? I missed the first part of it.
The cultural and personal DNA at an organizational level.
So are we talking, it depends what they mean by at the heart of it, but I'm assuming they mean at the heart of it, what's the cultural makeup? And then how does that relate to the personal makeup? Is that how you understand it as well?
This is how I understand it. Vince, if you want to type in chat a little bit more to help, but this is what I understand. Perhaps how an individual's cultural traits or preferences impact at an organizational level. Was that it?
Yeah, so if that's what they mean, that's actually quite helpful, because one of the things that we've been doing lately is comparing sort of personality and personal preference indicators. as a starting point of gleaning their awareness, and then linking that to their cultural awareness of understanding a bit more about themselves, about their unique background from their culture of origin. And so kind of bringing those two things together has been really insightful and powerful, because there's a fair bit of research out there that some say that personality, when you get to a certain age, you don't change too much around that space, or your preferences can, but in terms of that space, but your cultural intelligence, you can actually glean and you can grow that, and it's very malleable in the growth of that. And so, yeah, so there's been a fair bit of that that I've seen recently in a couple of mid-sized organizations really wrestling with those two pieces.
Yes, I can see that. One for Carrie. How does CQ compare with Hofstede Insights? Wilorna.
That's a great question. So within the CQ measurement tool on the cultural values and orientation side, the measurement takes care of individualism, collectivism. Hofstede's terms were masculine, feminine. CQ is competition and cooperative. And so they are built in there. There's also a long-term, short-term orientation, and so the five main ones of Hofstede's are covered within the assessment.
Thanks, Carrie. Yes, the cultural values that the Cultural Intelligence Center decided to use in the assessment that we provide are the ones that are most relevant to professional environments or professional activities. Now, we're talking about an assessment to identify someone's cultural value preferences or behavioral preferences. Now, CQ is a capability. So the distinction I was making before in terms of cultural awareness and cultural intelligence. So cultural intelligence is an ability. So given those differences that Carrie was just explaining, so Hofstede Insights talks about these cultural value dimensions and preferences across cultural groups. So that is the knowledge part, that is the awareness part, which is very important for us to be able to navigate culturally diverse contexts and situations, relationships. But CQ and the CQ framework is a set of capabilities that enables us to then navigate those differences. So I think it's important that we make this distinction, because the cultural value preferences, like Hofstede, this is just descriptive. We're describing how people prefer to behave, how they approach work-life relationships. And CQ is a developmental tool. You can evaluate where you are in terms of your ability to relate effectively in culturally diverse situations, and you can keep developing those capabilities. Unlike how Des was saying, your cultural value preferences, your approaches tend not to change. I hope that was helpful. Any other comments before I go to one or two more questions?
Probably the only other thing I'd say there, Viviane, is that I know this is a cultural intelligence sort of webinar, but it's interesting when we think about human development that that cultural intelligence is an aspect of us as humans. I think it's if we were to look at human development from a holistic point of view, and that's why I think CQ can really address some elements in that, and that's why if we were to look at other things like traits or emotional intelligence, generational intelligence, social intelligence, those other areas, they help form and shape who we are. And I think this is where uniquely the cultural intelligence part is really important, because it gives us that ability to adapt to different contexts and different spaces. And But if we look at a human being from a development point of view as a whole, I think that's a really key piece as well.
Yes, I agree. That's very important. I see a comment here that brings me joy. So John says, I wrote a journal article comparing and contrasting different assessment methods. Of course, CQ did very well. John, please share that with us.
Looks like he did. It's in the chat.
Oh, great. Thank you. All right. So I have a question here. John Hennings, I think that's the same John. I have a doctorate in business administration, and my doctoral research was on assigned expatriates. What is common about the expat experience across places and jobs, how people are changed by the experience, and how best to send people abroad, go abroad and work cross-culturally. I want to be Carrie or Des when I grow up. By that, I mean that I'd like to help people the way they do. The first step, obviously, is get certified. What are the steps after that? So, Des?
Well, firstly, thank you for that question. I think in terms of next steps, I think when you go into, if you want to do you want to develop people and you want to be involved in that kind of consulting side, I think it's really important to understand and be really clear about what patch you want to play in and what kind of need that you want to address. So I think if you can marry up a distinct passion that you have around a particular area, and you then can find the tools and the pieces that support that, I think that is a first step. And what I mean by clarity, I think often people, when they go into this line of work, they just love the human transformation. They just want to be inspired, and they want to inspire others and to make a difference in people's lives and to see them grow and develop. And they use that as a kind of a generic kind of aspect. But I think if you can be more specific about what unique value you can bring into that space and really get clear about that, really spend a lot of time on that, I think that's really important in your first step after certification into how you might utilize the CQ assessment in the marketplace. So I would suggest that you spend a good time with that, talk with some mentors and some coaches around that, and get really, really sharp on that.
Des, I like that so much because that piece is so important. The reflection that we need to engage in after concluding and completing that program, of absorbing the materials, the content, and truly reflecting on how we want to apply it and help others. Carrie, next steps for you.
I love what Des said. I think that is super important. And I was thinking about that in the context of sometimes when for example, when I went into the no, I'm just going to go actually the other way and say, I think one of the great things that you're going to find right when you're finished is definitely do self-reflection, but you're probably also going to want to dive deeper a little bit and maybe follow up with some of the readings or some other books in the areas that you might not be as familiar with when you did the certification. So as you're sitting there in the certification, you're thinking, oh, well, we just did that. I really got that. And then another area you might be, wait, can we do a bit more there? And so I think after, there's lots of resources you can look at that will also provide you. So it's sort of, you just keep learning at the same time as that after you get certified, and you'll know a lot more about the areas that you're good at and the areas that you want to learn more about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's so important because it's so much that we get. Dave, any parting thoughts?
Well, I'm just going to mansplain what Carrie said and does, and that is to say, if I circle all the way back to the beginning of our conversation of saying one of the strengths of CQ is it applies to so many areas, it's also a potential liability to those who've been certified, because apart from the focus that Des and Carrie have mentioned, then you can start to find yourself just floundering and talking generically about CQ. So what people really want are tangible how does this help me as a nurse? How does it help me as an HR leader, as a business executive? So my parting words would be like, we hope that the CQ piece is a tool that helps you, and then put that alongside your own expertise, passion, lived experience to help people really apply it in practical ways.
I echo your words. Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Des.
Thank
you,
you.
Carrie. Thank you, everyone who joined us. Again, we have many available dates for CQ certification if you're interested. And if you are already CQ certified, please join us for the Global Summit in Chicago. We truly appreciate your being here, joining us and this important conversation. Have a great rest of your day, evening. Thank you, Prudence. Thanks, everyone.